My name is Dirk, preaching pastor here at Encounter, and I just want to give a quick shout out again to Encounter sending love to the Philippines. You may have gotten one of these cards on your way in. We've got a few more at the table by the entrance as well. But just to follow that story up, because I got to hear it from Grace firsthand, and I thought you all need to hear it as well. One of the things that she told me was that when God laid it on her heart to do something, she gathered up a lot of these street kids that didn't have a home, that didn't have really anything, and they're hungry, and they beg for some coins, just some change to go and get something to eat. But more often than getting something to eat, they would instead go to the store because glue is cheaper than food. They'd get that instead and put it in a bag and huff it, because at least, she said, they would do it at least to make the hunger go away for a little while. And it wrecked me in the most beautiful way. I thought we've got to do something to multiply the love of God, one of our values, locally and globally. So on the back of this card, it just lets you know a little bit about what a donation goes towards. $1 provides a meal, $6 provides school supplies. $2 is a doctor's checkup. One of the biggest barriers to kids getting an education in the Philippines is a school uniform is required, and for $15 donation, you can make one of those happen. So it's just an awesome thing to partner with and to get excited about. All right, today we're continuing this series called I Quit. And it's not a series about my prolonged exit from Encounter. You cannot get away from me that easily. I Quit is a series about all the things that we're stopping, that we're quitting, in order to more fully follow Jesus. So we kicked off this series and we said, I quit making excuses. And then we really ramped up this series the week after that by quitting church and taking a snow day after Easter, which was weird. And then last week, Dr. Gary Burge shared this message with us about quitting this life of complacency, kind of that in-between. And I love that one of the takeaways of that was about how material wealth breeds or fosters this spiritual poverty. And it just, oh man, I loved it. It just hit me. Today we're talking maybe about one of the most important elements, most important installments of this series. It's about quitting comparison. All right, and so when we talk about comparison, on the one hand, it's like, why do we do it? Because we all learned it in school somewhere, all right? It's just a skill that we needed to pick up, preferably externally, not internally, but we compare, like, this box is bigger than this box, or this giraffe is taller than this gerbil, or I can get a better gift, a cheaper gift for my wife for her anniversary at Dollar General than at Hellsberg, right? Like we need to learn these things. Pro tip, she came to the first service. Pro tip, when we develop this skill, it's meant to be used externally, but something happens. Something happens when we take this skill and we apply it internally. Like instead of applying it to things, this is bigger than that, this is better than that, we apply it to ourselves. She's better than me. I'm better than him. Like something awful, I'd even say something evil happens inside of us. And it's that comparison that robs us of joy, that erodes out faith, that potentially ends careers, and kills relationships, even marriage. So what we're going to do is that I think what's going to be helpful is for you to think about the different areas of life that you compare yourself in. Now, because I had 2 weeks off, I got 4 areas, and they're all going to have the letter P in them. Okay? The first one, if you're going to take notes, the area that we compare ourselves in is our possessions. Just the stuff that we have, the car that we drive or the zip code that we live in, our stuff. The second P is appearance. I didn't say they would all start with P. I'd need 3 weeks in order to make that happen. But our appearance is what we compare ourselves in, right? For some of us, right, it's like, she wears her hair that way, or I wear my hair that way, or, he has hair and I don't have hair, or I've got hair growing where I never intended hair to grow before. Our appearance for guys, sometimes it's usually like the people that we're around, they go to the office or friend groups or family members, or if you go to the gym and you're like, well, that dude's like jacked out of his mind, so I can't compete with that, but like I'm probably stronger than this guy over here, right? It's that kind of the comparison. I'm going to make like this gross generalization, and I hope that you'll hang with me here. But I think it's possible, right, that ladies have it even worse on the appearance side of things, because generally, at least with guys, we compare ourselves with people who actually exist. Women, ladies often are like comparing themselves with like the Instagram fitness model who like poses in the exact right place and then shops the whole thing to death, right? And so it's like, you're trying to look like that. She doesn't even look like that, right? But that's the basis of comparison. The third one is performance. We compare our performance, sales numbers, he's doing better or she's doing better. Or maybe performance, like we're performing equally, but like she gets all of the praise at work, and why don't I get any of the praise for the same performance? That was like a bonus P comparison, the praise deal. The last one is the place in life. Maybe by this point in life, you thought that you would have everything figured out. You thought that you'd have a career like lining up or something like it. You thought at this point in your college career, like you'd at least have a major picked out. You were supposed to graduate last year, right? And it's not coming together. You thought that you'd be married with kids or have a family or something, but the place in life, it hasn't happened. And you're wondering why. No, more than that, you're wondering, why not me? Why them and not me? And this comparison thing, it erodes faith, it robs joy, it ends careers, it destroys relationships. It's all over in the Bible. You know how long it took in the story of the Bible for this comparison deal to claim its first victim? 4 chapters. In Genesis chapter 4, we see the story of Cain and Abel. And they both bring their tithes, which I love as a side point, right? They bring their tithes to God, their tenths to God. They don't offer it to God because it's already God's, so they bring it. Cain grows crops and Abel grows flocks. And they both bring their tithes to God. And you get the story that Abel brought his best flocks and Cain brought some crops. And God looked at Abel's offering, his tithe, and said, well done, wow, just the very, very best. And he looked at Cain's and he said, I think there's some room for improvement here. I'm paraphrasing. And the thing about the story is, Cain doesn't get angry at God for demanding so much. How can you demand 10% back from me? No, he doesn't get angry at God. He doesn't even get angry at himself for not doing the very thing that he knew he was supposed to do. No, what gets me in the story is that he gets angry at his brother Abel and thinks, if only I could eliminate him out of this equation. If only he was gone and there wasn't anybody else that I could be compared to, then I would have all of the positive attention of my maker. And so he does the thing. In the Bible where we see it claim the first victim, first Cain's heart, secondly, Abel's life, as he brings him out in the field and kills him. This comparison thing all throughout Genesis chapter 25, this couple, Isaac and Rebekah, they have twins, and they're so like thrilled with these twin boys, Esau first and then Jacob. And it tells us that Esau liked to hunt and go out in the fields. Jacob preferred to stay in among the tents and cook. And then this one line, this one verse in Genesis chapter 25 where it says that Dad, Isaac, loved Esau, but Rebekah, Mom, loved Jacob. And do you know how much hurt is in those statements? Like, why do we parents do that? Why do we put that on our kid to say, like, one of them's the athletic one, and the other one's the musical one, and the other one's the artistic one? And we compare them to each other instead of looking at them as individuals. The world of hurt that's there. One more, Peter and John. These guys are like just going bickering as if they're twins, right? Struggling with each other to see not just who's good before Jesus, but no, who's the best, who's the greatest in the kingdom that Jesus came to tell them about. It got so bad that at one point Jesus just had to say, like, guys, you got to just knock it off completely. John tells us that on the night that Jesus was betrayed, the Last Supper, the meals were had laying down, and so Jesus is here laying down. John says, oh, no, I was the one that got to sit by like head to Jesus. Subtext, the best Peter could do is to sit with his head at the feet of Jesus. John wrote the gospel, by the way, and history tends to favor the people writing the history books. So when John tells the story about like his frenemy relationship with Peter, he says, he writes himself into the story, not as me or I, but he writes himself in as the one Jesus loved. Like, you've got to be kidding me. Now he's just trolling everybody. He says, after the resurrection, when we find out that Jesus had raised from the dead and the tomb is empty, John says, hey, Peter and I, we had to go check it out. And so we ran. We both booked it over there. And you know what? You know who got there first? It's the one Jesus loved. Peter was so infuriated by the whole thing that after his denial, after the resurrection, when Jesus is talking to Peter face to face, and he's installing him as the de facto spiritual head of the church, Peter says, what about him? What about John? And Jesus has to stare back at Peter. And he says something profound. He said, if I want to keep him around and alive until I come back, that's my business. But you, Peter, you follow me. In a sense, I think he's saying to Peter and probably all of us, if you want to be miserable for your whole life, keep your eyes on John. Keep your eyes on someone in that other place, with that other possession, with a better performance, if you want to be miserable. But if you want joy that will never be eclipsed, Jesus says, keep your eyes on me. How? Little passage tucked away in the back of the Bible, in the book of Philippians, we find out that not only is it possible to quit the comparison game, but there's actually a secret to be learned from it. That's what the author, that's what Paul calls it. He says there's a secret to this whole thing. I don't know about you, I want to know what the secret is. So if you have a Bible with you in your pocket, you can turn it on. Otherwise, there's Bibles underneath the chairs in front of you. By the way, we give away Bibles all the time, so we love it when people take those home. That's our gift. The words are also going to be on the screen behind me, but we're going to go to the book of Philippians and start it off. We're just doing 3 verses today, and it says Philippians, starting off in verse 11, Paul says, I'm not saying any of this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Okay, what did we just read? What does that mean? Not for us. No, not for us. For them, 2,000 years ago, what was Paul trying to convey? He's writing this little letter. It's 4 chapters long only. This is in the 4th chapter, toward the end. And he's writing this note to this church in Philippi. You kind of picture a map of the area. You might know where Greece is. He is not in Greece anymore. That's where Philippi is. He's all the way in Rome, in prison. See, what happened is that he went through Greece one time, and he started sharing the Jesus story with the people in the city of Philippi, and they believed it, right? And they started seeing the change that the Jesus way made. And so they continued to meet up even after Paul left. And they started this church. Now, I don't think like, church, more like a large small group. And they continued eating together and serving together and poring over the scriptures together and singing together, even after Paul booked it, even after he moved on. So it's been 10 years now, and we're all the way from Greece, kind of through the Aegean, the Mediterranean, all the way to Rome and Italy. It's not 51 when the church started. It's now 61 AD, and Paul's situation, his place has changed as well, because he's now in prison, literally house arrest. He's in chains next to a Roman guard, and they allow him to dictate letters to people. Now, what do we know? What we know about this Roman house arrest situation is that it was only as comfortable as it was because Paul was a Roman citizen, something that cost a tremendous amount of money, which will be more important later on. He was under house arrest, and what we know is that seems to be because he was a Roman citizen, he got to do things like pen, dictate letters. He also was entitled to the minimum necessary requirements to keep someone alive until they figured out what in the world to do with them. So this meant he got some allotment of food, not much, but passable. He got some clothes to wear, nothing that would keep him warm through the damp, cold Roman winter, but at least it was something. Threadbare enough, it was something. If he wanted anything more than just the basic necessities, I hope you have rich friends. He did, but either they didn't know about his situation or they didn't care about his situation. Who knew and who heard was that church 10 years previously in the city of Philippi. Now, they were not an affluent group of people. They were poor. But even in their poverty, they pass around a hat and say, this collection is going to be for Paul because he's going to need something more than the threadbare clothes that he has been wearing to make it through the winter. He's going to need something more to eat than the minimum allotment that they're giving him. Let's provide some encouragement all the way across what seemed like the world at the time. Does this start to ring a bell with anybody maybe that we're working on? The idea about sending some encouragement around the world, something to know that there's another group of people thinking of them, there's another group of people praying for them, that they are not alone, that God knows what is happening. Okay, so they get together, they get a little sum of money together, not a whole lot, but for them it was incredible. And they want to send it to Paul. Now they don't bank wire money over to him in prison. They don't pull out their phones well, just Venmo him real quick and he'll get it. No. It was much more complicated. They had to take the money, put it in a bag, and then they had to send someone to sail through the Aegean, to sail through the Mediterranean, to sail up to Rome in Italy from Greece and deliver it in person. I think that when Epaphroditus was his name, I think when Epaphroditus showed up and presented that meager gift to Paul, I think Paul wept. Not because it was a life-changing allotment of money, but simply because he knew, I am not forgotten. I am not alone. And he wants to gift them something in return. And what we have as the book of Philippians is the thank you note back to the church in Philippi, among which Paul says, my gift back to you is not a thing, it is not a sum of money, but I want to show you about what you need. I want to show you what you already have. My gift to you is a gift of contentment. And I want you to know, this is something that you can learn. This is a gift that you can enroll into, the school of contentment, though you may not want to. He continues the line from verse 11, we go to verse 12. And he kind of does this back and forth thing. In the next line, he goes, listen, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret, I love he calls it a secret, I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. He kind of does this back and forth deal. Now, if we're going to continue this today, he's like, listen, I've learned the secret of being content. I know what it means to get on an airplane and fly to something called an all-inclusive resort. And I know what it is to camp. I know what it is. I know what it is to bring my ramen noodles and use the coffee out of the break room Keurig, or the water from the break room Keurig to heat my noodles up. That got very real. And I know what it is to cut into a Ruth's Chris steak. I know what both of these things are like. I know what it means to be bumped up to first class on that flight, and I know what it's like to take the bus. I know. Let me ask you a question. In this learning contentment, enrolling in the school of contentment, let me ask you a question that could change your week. No, it could change the season of life that you're in. Where do you think Paul learned contentment? Paul was born into an affluent family, a rich family. But Paul, he had his Roman citizenship from birth. His parents gifted that to him, a tremendous cost. Paul was affluent enough to go to school and to stay in school. Paul could learn Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic. The list goes on and on. Paul could stack up all of these degrees because he had the luxury of not needing to go to the docks like his friends or the people in another social class. Paul had so much available to him that he could sit and he could study at the feet of Gamaliel. It's a one-on-one, it's a private Ivy League education at the time. This is Paul. Like he is born into affluence. He doesn't know what it's like to be hungry. He doesn't know what it's like to have threadbare clothes until now. Until now, when he's in want and he has nothing. In fact, he has less than nothing because he doesn't even have his freedom. He's chained to a Roman guard, not knowing whether he's going to die or live here. I think he learned contentment. Not in the haves, not in the plenty, not in the well-fed, but in the hungry, in the want, in the need, in the not enoughs. See, what we do a lot of the time is we hinge, and this is what the church in Philippi, what he didn't want for them, is we hinge our contentment. Sometimes we call it our happiness, but he sticks with contentment. It's a better word. We hinge our contentment to that hill to climb over. Like our contentment is dependent on that comma in our net worth or in our income. Our contentment is on my family being at such and such status. My contentment is based on getting this job or getting this praise or getting this performance. My contentment is hinged on then and there. And the gift Paul wants to share with the church of Philippi and Encounter Church today is to say, no. Your contentment doesn't depend on then and there. Your contentment depends on the here and now. In fact, I want you to say that with me, here and now. When I say your contentment, church, doesn't hinge on the then and there. Your contentment hinges on the here and now. Here and now. It's possible to enroll in the school of contentment here and now. And some of you are there right now. You simply have to ask God what I have to learn. I heard this story a couple weeks ago. I loved it. It was an ABC News in my feed that came up, and it was just so good. It was so perfect. I want to share it with you. This woman says, hey, you want to talk about this comparison thing, this contentment thing? We live in a tiny house. We live in this house so little, and we pack 4 kids, 2 dogs, 2 cats, a bird, and an assortment of creatures into the petting zoo that our oldest daughter calls her basement bedroom. The floors are slanted and creaky, and most of the tile in the kitchen is missing. It's grout. The basement often floods, and in the spring and in the winter, you can almost see your breath in the upstairs bedroom because for whatever reason, our lovely furnace cannot push the heat all the way that far up to the bedrooms where we need it. We have mismatched appliances and secondhand furniture in every room, and I love this tiny house. Its creaks and the cracks in the plaster are like poetry to my soul. I don't care that all the houses on all sides of us are far bigger and fancier. I don't envy the vehicles in the driveway or even notice their expensive vacations every year. I don't compare our lives to theirs in any way. Not anymore. You see, many, many years ago, when there were only 2 kids, and I was married to a remarkably different man. That man cared more about material possessions and instant gratification than his family. And we had a big house that was brand new and a credible view of a lake, nice vehicles, and even a boat in the driveway. But inside the front door of that house was a different story completely. There was a life filled with alcoholism, infidelity, and rampant overspending. There was children who never saw their parents unless they were fighting or passed out in bed. Now, during those years, I often felt as though I was living in a reverse snow globe. The world outside of our home was sparkly and happy. Inside, I tried desperately to calm things down, but no matter what I did, we just kept getting picked up and shaken around again. From the outside, we were the envy of our neighbors and friends. Inside, it was a nightmare that nearly destroyed me and my kids. We don't compare anymore because we know what's behind some of those fancy doors, and we know how to be truly content with what's behind ours. Contentment is not then and there. Contentment is here and now, learned in the school of contentment. Paul, how do you get that perspective, man? Like knowing where you came from and the people that you came and the status that you came to this place, to this hole where you might not ever get out of again, to this dungeon. How do you come up with the wherewithal? How do you come up with the courage? Where do you come up with the strength to face, forget about next year's problems, just today? He continues one more line and he says, oh, by the way, verse 13, I can do all this through him. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Quick question, how many people have heard this passage? It's just this line, right? Like tons of people, right? Sometimes I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Don't put your hands up anymore. How many of you have seen this verse on the shirt of somebody running a 10K, right? Like so often, like we bring up this verse, it's like, I can get that corner office, I can meet my sales goal, I can run a 7-minute mile because I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And it's like, no, you can't. No, you can't. Because we never read that verse in the context of not running a marathon or hitting sales goals. This verse is written in the context of being content. Paul is saying, I can have the strength, I can find contentment because I have Jesus. Because, I don't know, maybe I met up with Peter one time. You know, maybe we just had a conversation and Peter said to me, the craziest thing happened. I met Jesus after he rose from the dead, Paul, and you know what he told me? What did he tell you? He said, quit looking at John. If I stare at him, I'm going to be miserable. And I've got one singular calling, one thing to live out, and that's simply to follow Jesus. So I can be content because I've got all the strength of what it means to follow Jesus. That's all I really have, and that's all I really need. That's enough for me. There was an English writer in the 18th century, 1700s, and because I always get those mixed up. I don't know why it matters. He was writing in response to this question of like where he derives his inspiration from for his stories and for his writings. And he said, I think even more than that God's people need to be instructed, they simply need to be reminded. And I love that so much that I'm going to share that with you now. I think even more that you, church, and me, I put myself in that category too. I think even more than I need to be instructed to quit comparing my place, my performance, my appearance, or my possession, to quit comparing my peas to somebody else's. I think even more than I need to hear that instruction, I need to hear a reminder both of what I have and both of who I am. And what I have is not something that I'm going to write down on a list of material things, more peas, and to tuck it into the bathroom mirror so I can remember every morning. Not a bad practice for gratitude, but what I have, church, goes so much beyond that. What I have goes beyond appearance, goes beyond possessions, goes beyond performance, goes beyond the place in life. What I have is nothing short than a resurrection story. What I have is nothing less than an empty grave and an eternity that lasts just beyond death. What I have is the risen Lord, Jesus Christ, in my life, and that could never be taken away. Can somebody please say amen? Thank you. That's what I have, and that's what you can have too. That's what you can have too. But I also need to be reminded, but you also need to be reminded of who you are. Paul wrote another letter to the church in Ephesus this time. And he said, don't forget, we are God's handiwork. Say that word with me. We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. We are God's handiwork. Do you get that? Do you get that God reached out, the creator of everything, and as he was molding the planets and hanging them in space just right, he was thinking about how he was going to knit you together. Like, do you get what it means? That we're the handiwork of the Almighty. That as he's balancing the delicate ecosystems of the earth and making everything set just right so that no matter what conditions, hot or cold, it can thrive. He was planning out what kind of conditions he was going to put you in this week or this season so that you can thrive. And even though you didn't want to be there, he says, no, you need to be there because I've got something for you there. Even more than what we have, it's whose we are. My daughter has this sign up in her room, and she was reciting it to me because she's so proud. She's 7. I'm not proud. I mean, it's fine. You can clap, whatever. But she was reciting this from memory. And she has her eyes closed like this, and she's going, I am the daughter of a king who is not moved by the world. For my God is with me and goes before me, and I do not fear because I am his. And I was so proud. And I said, her name is Lily, and I said, Lily, what is it that you call a daughter of a king? She thought about it for just a second. And then she got this ear-to-ear grin. And she pulls in tight close at a little ball with her hands clenched. And she goes, a princess. And I said, that's right. And your dad is a prince. Remember what you have, an empty grave. And remember whose you are. Let's stand up and let's continue worshiping together. First off in prayer. Our gracious God, you have gifted us with something so much more than we could ever even ask for or imagine. You have gifted us with an empty grave and with every fear conquered. And God, give us the faith today to lean into that and to own that and to claim that. That God, when you go before us, nothing is going to stand against us. How could it? God, you're asking someone here to quit something, to quit comparing a possession, quit comparing a place in life, quit comparing their appearance, quit comparing their performance. Jesus, we simply ask for courage for whoever that is to lay it down at your altar and to say, that doesn't matter because my eyes aren't on John, my eyes aren't on this world, my eyes are fixed